I will try to speak English. It's very unusual for me to speak in English publicly in Poland. And actually, I never speak in English. I speak in American. I thought a couple of you would enjoy that. I even actually speak New York, so that's even worse. Jews in Poland. Most people outside of Poland, when they hear the idea of a living Jewish community in Poland, imagine that I'm hallucinating. That what had happened to the Jews during the Holocaust was so horrific that there couldn't be a Jewish community left today in Poland. What happened? Why are there Jews in Poland today, and what's going on? September 1st, 1939, World War II begins. At that point, there are 3.5 million Jews living in Poland, over 10% of the general population, the heart, the soul of the Ashkenazi Jewish world. It was here at that point for almost 900 years, creating, nurturing, blossoming Jewish culture, Jewish religion, Jewish tradition. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. And by the end of 1944, 90% of the 3.5 million Jews no longer alive, having been murdered by Germans and their accomplices. That statement is so horrific, so overwhelming, that most people don't think, it's almost inappropriate to ask, well, how many Jews were alive at the end of the war? But if we want to talk about a Jewish community today, we need to know, where were we in the end of World War II? 10% survive. Many of them having fled into the Soviet Union, returning, about 2/3. Another third either having survived through the camps, and the other half of that third having survived by being saved by righteous Gentiles, by Polish non-Jews, with the risk of their lives, saved those Jews. And I should also add, it's not only the risk of their lives, some of them actually gave their lives and the lives of their families. So it means in 1945-46, by the time the Jews had started coming back from the Soviet Union, there were about 350,000 Jews in Poland, 10%. That represents more Jews in Poland in 46-47 than the United Kingdom today. So it could have been a vibrant Jewish community. What happened? As we know, the Soviet army liberated Poland from Nazi Germany and then occupied Poland 4 minutes later, maybe it was only 3, and then became the new occupiers of Poland. And so these survivors who had survived things that indescribable, horrible, had a question: where do I want to rebuild my life? Do I want to do it here in a country that is still traumatic, post-Holocaust, occupied by Soviets in a communist regime? And the overwhelming majority of the survivors said, no, it's not going to be the place we want to rebuild our lives. Now, clearly, I'm simplifying things. You try to get all this in 18 minutes. And so the overwhelming majority of the 350,000 survivors leave Poland in the 25 years after World War II. And this is why I also bring it all the way through 68, 69. If you want to feel safe saying the statement, I am a Jew, it makes good sense to leave post-Holocaust, Soviet-occupied, communist Poland. And so the majority do, but not everyone. And those who remain, basically in agreement with those who leave. So if I want to stay Jewish, if I want to feel safe saying, I am a Jew, I leave. But if I want to stay, I stop being Jewish. To the extent that often I don't even tell my children or my grandchildren. And so there's a hiding, a secret, for 50 years, from 39 to 89, to the collapse of the communist system. At which point, now think about this, someone who is out of fear, out of trauma, it's not assimilation, it's not lack of cultural meaning, fear for 50 years about having this identity of being a Jew. And then 1989 comes, this unbelievable miracle. Poland is a free, democratic country. And there is real democracy in Poland. Like I like to say, there are no hanging chads here in Poland. That's real American. And so these individuals, and this is not a group thing going on, it's individuals. People saying, I've been hiding it from my kids, my grandkids, my neighbors, my friends, my coworkers for 50 years. Is it safe for me to say it today? Has democracy so changed my world? And it's all very individual, not communal at the start point. Can I say it? And now, over the past 22 years, thousands of Poles have discovered they have Jewish roots. And it's one by one by one. So let me share with you now a couple of stories. How do people find out? Well, reality is they find out many different ways. Anything from deathbed confessions to after somebody. I know one story where a 17-year-old girl, her grandma, about 15 years ago, unfortunately was killed in a car crash. Nothing to do with communists, nothing to do with Nazis. Still a tragedy for the family. And she's going, the parents are on vacation out of the country. She's going through the papers. If she's 17, but she has to help. She discovers her grandmother's last name is not what she thought. It was something like Goldberg or Greenberg. And she asks Mom, was Grandma Jewish? No. So she asks her aunt. She was. She goes back to Mom, and Mom says, your sister says something different. So okay, but Dad doesn't know. Don't tell him. Or another story where a woman in her early 40s comes to me with her two children, a 20-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter, and says, I think my mother's parents were Jewish. Grandma used to make pancakes. Thank you, pancakes again. But I think she liked her grandma's pancakes. But no one else made these pancakes. And everyone's grandmother has something that only she makes. Sometimes it's edible, sometimes not. And most likely not only with grains. I just want to tell you, I've been a vegetarian since 1979. So, and I'm not a bodybuilder. Anyway, okay, back to the subject. The thing keeps going. Yeah, it's terrible. And she said she's never seen these pancakes anywhere else, Grandma's special pancakes, until one day she's walking the street, she bumps into an Israeli tour group, and they're carrying a box of her grandmother's pancakes, a box of matzah. She says, wow, Grandma's making... But not only that, there are several other things. For example, none of the dates match on any of the documents, very typical of people who survived the Holocaust, always changing dates. And then she said to me, which was for me the most moving, that as a child, she remembers her grandmother, after serving the grandkids meat, would not let them drink milk. In Judaism, with the kosher requirements, we can't mix meat with milk. So here you have a grandmother who was too afraid to tell her grandchildren because of her personal experience, the trauma of the Holocaust, the persecutions, the problems of communism, but still wants to keep something. So she gave her grandchild was, you can't drink milk after meat. And you have to imagine this kid's like, 6, 7 years old, says, what a wonderful grandma. Every grandma in the world says, drink your milk. And this grandma says, you can't drink your milk. Go grandma. And now, some 20 years later, she's coming to me with her kids, especially because the 20-year-old son really wants to, find out. And what do you do about it? Where do you go with it? And that really is the story of the Jewish community of Poland today, of discovery. Two more quick stories. One is of another group, a subgroup, and that are the people who were children during the war, given away by their biological Jewish parents to Polish non-Jewish families to save them. Now, some of them were old enough to remember, some of them not. And so there's a man that came to me several years ago who said, Rabbi, my mother died in May. And after the funeral, the neighbors came over and said, actually, that's not your mother. your biological mother gave you away to your mother, to this woman who brought you up, who was like your mother during the war. But she never wanted to tell you. She risked her life to save you, but never wanted to tell you that you really weren't hers. And so now that she's gone, you ought to know. And he said to me, you know, it was 3 months later, and he's thinking about it. He says, if really, in fact, I was born to a Jewish mother, I want to know what it means to be Jewish. But I have a problem. I know nothing about Judaism. And I feel bad I don't even have a Jewish baptism. Now, in Jewish tradition, there is no baptism. We do something else at the age of 8 days old. That's circumcision. So I was tempted, I didn't. I controlled my New York self and did not tell him I have good news and bad news. Right? The good news is we don't use water. The bad news is get me the knife. I didn't tell him that. But, you know, this man is now part of the Jewish community. Last story, and that is a young couple, now in their early 30s, met in high school and fell in love. It's very romantic. And soon after high school, they get married. And when the young lady's about 20 years old, she discovers that she's really Jewish. But at that point, she's 20. She's got a husband, a little baby. It doesn't really make any difference to her. Some while later, she says, I want to check it out. So she goes to the Jewish Historical Institute here just behind Platz Bankowy. She goes to the genealogical project and checks it out. And while she's there, she figures, maybe her husband's Jewish. So she comes home for dinner. She says, hi, honey, dinner's ready. Guess what? I'm Jewish. You're Jewish. Maybe that's a good way to kill the appetite. I don't know. I'm connecting back to the last. Well, you'll understand in a moment, the young man was not very pleased. Was rather shocked. Again, it'll be clear in a moment why. So he goes to his parents. He says, well, Mom, Dad, my wife is saying ridiculous things again. He says, well, this time she's right. In fact, we never told you. Both of us are Jewish. His reaction was to go on a 3-day drinking binge. You should not try that at home. Definitely bad for the diet. And when he woke up, some time later, I don't know exactly how long, he said, if I am Jewish, then I should know what it means to be Jewish. And so he started learning. Both of them are now very active members of our Jewish community of Warsaw. And so far the story is boring. The interesting part is that when they fell in love in high school, that very romantic moment, they were both skinheads. So it's very romantic. Two skinheads fall in love, get married, then one after the other, find out they're Jewish, become very into it, are quite traditional now. It's what I like to call from skinheads to covered heads. Now, before I wanted to touch one more point, and that is, before I sum up, and that is, how can you have the revival of Jewish life when we all know that there's horrible anti-Semitism in Poland? That's what I hear abroad. Well, yes, there is anti-Semitism in Poland, unfortunately, as there is all over Europe. Doesn't make me any happier the fact that anti-Semitism today is worse. And I used to say this before 3 days ago. France, England, Belgium, Scandinavia, Austria, Hungary, Ukraine. Did I miss any European countries? Andorra is very good in Andorra. Now, the question is, why do people abroad think that anti-Semitism is really bad? I have a friend who was at a conference in Africa, and one of the women's conference in Africa, and one of the women said, yes, we heard about Poland. There's horrible anti-Semitism there. There is an image. One could talk a lot longer than 18 or 20 minutes, but in one sentence, anti-Semitism was growing here in Poland in the late 1930s after the death of Pilsudski, and it was nasty. There were a lot of Jews here. They fought back, but it was nasty. And then, more or less, Polish-Jewish relations history gets frozen from 39 to 89. There's no natural contact between Poles and Jews on any kind of larger basis. Individuals, yes, but not communal or larger numbers. And so Polish-Jewish relations were in a freezer for 50 years. They come out of the freezer in 89, and the world is a different place. And the biggest change in terms of the question of anti-Semitism is the teachings of the late Pope John Paul II, who did more to effectively fight anti-Semitism than anyone else in the last 2,000 years. And so that fact, along with others, along with building a new old Poland after the fall of communism, which means the rejection of communism, of fascism, and for some also anti-Semitism, that today there is an opposite direction. And this is in my experience of living here since 1990, where there are Poles who unfortunately still have those old anti-Semitic feelings, but many more Poles who say, that's not part of us today. And part of my mission, my main mission, is to work with people discovering their Jewish roots, helping to build Jewish life here. But another thing I do is to talk to people outside to say, hey guys, what you're saying is true in 1938, maybe, but in 2000 and, what do we have to, 12, 11, somewhere, you're just not right. And that the world has a lot to learn from Poland today in the way they are dealing with anti-Semitism. I was yesterday in Wysoko Mazowiecki, where a cemetery was desecrated 2 days ago. And the mayor and the kids from the high school were there with the starosta and the voyevoda, and we cleaned the cemetery together. That, for me, is the new Poland. And that is the new Poland which we are building a new, old, re-emerging Jewish community. Just to conclude, just to think about one of the amazing miracles of democracy, this blessing of democracy that Poland has fought so long for, but really came to fruition only in 1989. One of the blessings, the outcomes of this blessing are that small Jewish communities, small other minority communities today in Poland can flourish, can grow, can nurture, and are supported by the larger society. And that, for me, is one of the great examples of the blessing of democracy here in Poland, 2012. Thank you.